and furious, and just like last year, it's a really good idea to let me know you have a bill coming, and if you don't champion your bill, your odds of getting heard are also lower, and the schedule is filling up very, very quickly. So, and I do like to try to be keep everybody in the loop as much as possible. So the agenda for next week came out, and if you notice, there's a hearing on the Credit Act. That's basically a placeholder until we have the bill number, which we should get tomorrow, and your agenda will change tomorrow because that is a Friday, and we would be hearing that bill on a Monday. I certainly will be extending the timeline for testimony just to acknowledge the tight timeline there. So please don't have any angst. We work real hard to make sure we get everybody's information in. Thank you. Our next item to do is introduce Representative Neighbor. She joined us last year, and it's always a pleasure to have her because she is very knowledgeable in education. So you jump in here well when you come. So thank you.
Thank you. I moved up from kindergarten to first grade.
Do we have any bills to introduce? Representative Brantley.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I have a bill, RS number 26 RS 3077, and this is in regards to Blueprint for Literacy for retired and substitutes.
Maybe not necessarily the blueprint, but the seal of literacy.
Seal of literacy for the Blueprint requirements.
Okay, very good. Is there any objection to the introduction? Seeing none, your bill is introduced. Speaking of, somebody introduced a bill, and I lost my master list, and I don't know who introduced it, and I need to talk to them before scheduling it or deciding to schedule it. It was the bill about letter grades for KU Med Center. Okay, thank you. I'll speak with you later. I usually can match the introducer and the bill, and I drew a blank on that one. Thank you so much. All right. With that, we are ready to begin our hearing on 2420. And I'm going to begin with the Revisor's Office. Jason, would you like to tell us about this bill? Everything we never knew and always wanted to know.
Thank you, Madam Chair, members of the committee. House Bill 2420 would enact new law to require parental notification and consent before school-based mental health services could be provided to a student. The definition of school-based mental health is in the bill on page 2, starting line 16. It is any program, intervention, or strategy applied in a school setting that is specifically designed to influence a student's emotional, behavioral, or social functioning. And this includes specifically interventions that, to address mental health concerns that are provided under Tier 2 and Tier 3 of the multi-tiered system of supports framework, and it specifically excludes interventions that fall under Tier 1 of MTSS. So there's the definition for the provisions of the bill. Before mental health services can be provided, verbal and written notice must be communicated to the parent of the student to lay out the purpose, the time frame for the services to be provided, and the plan for how those are to be provided. That must all be included in the notice. And then the parent must provide written consent to those services before they can begin. And that written consent can be either electronic or in a physical copy of consent. There is a provision in the bill, you'll see on page 1, line 18, that nothing in the law would prevent a school from administering a suicide risk assessment or screening tool if there is a credible report of a risk of suicide of a student. And then there is a civil penalty provision in the legislation for a school district that violates this law. The penalty would be a $5,000 civil fine against the school district to be collected and deposited in the state general fund if prosecuted by the Attorney General, or to be deposited in the county general fund if it's prosecuted by the local county or district attorney. The provisions will go into effect on July 1st of this year if enacted, and with that, I'd be happy to stand for any questions.
Thank you, Revisor Long. Representative Ruiz.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Jason, as I kind of thumb through this, is there any part in this where it says, what if the parent is the problem?
There is no exemption for a cause of the mental health need. It is notice and written consent by the parent or person acting as parent. That's required.
Okay, thank you.
Just for clarity, though, I mean, if a school personnel are mandated reporters, so if a child brought a concern to a parent, they would be mandated to report that.
Yes, but the school cannot provide school-based mental health services to the student.
Okay, thank you. I appreciate the clarification. Representative Ruiz and then Schmoy.
Just, I don't know if I was understood or not. If my child goes to school and I'm the problem at home, am I still supposed to sign that document, or what happens then?
Jason, do you have an answer for that?
A parent or a person acting as parent for the student must consent to the school-based mental health services.
Okay, and I probably shouldn't speculate, but I think what would happen is, depending on what the problem was, I mean, if a parent was a danger to the child, I think there would be a referral and DCF, and I think at some point, if there was custody, would come in. But you ask an interesting question, the detail that definitely needs to be thought about. Thank you, Representative Schmoy.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Okay, so you specifically said that they can still do the risk assessment for suicide. When a school does that, when that comes into play, are we aware, do they have to contact a parent at that point?
No, the bill does not specify contacting the parent if an assessment or screening tool has been administered under this legislation. Let me look at our other statutes we have on student health to see if such an assessment would trigger a parental notice. I think it might, but I'm going to double check on that.
Thank you very much.
Any other questions for Jason? Representative McNorton.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Jason, could you, in line 23, universally under Tier 1 of the multi-tiered system, what is Tier 1? What's the...
That's the lowest, most basic level of interventions, and I think are generally not necessarily student-specific interventions, but I would defer to a conferee who may be more knowledgeable on MTSS to opine on the differences between tiers 1, 2, and 3.
Thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions for Jason? Thank you, Jason. And I wouldn't be surprised if we call on you again. So we will begin with testimony. We have 9 conferees today, and so I think that should easily allow us 4 minutes per conferee. The vice chair will wave a 1 minute and a 30-second sign for you, and then the buzzer will go off. And please cease once the buzzer goes off. And then, of course, you very likely will be asked questions. So yesterday it was pointed out to me that because we go in alphabetical order, the same people always have to be first. And they take all the arrows, and yes, I'm looking at you, Mr. Graham, because yes, you would be first. And then I also noticed that our WebEx people are usually last, and we somehow manage to always get in a rush. So I'm going to go from the bottom of the list up today and kind of help balance that out, because I do have sympathy for the people on WebEx who put time and effort into their testimony and sometimes are rushed. So Representative Steele, you are going to be our first conferee.
Madam Chair and members of the Education Committee, thank you so much for the opportunity to stand here today in support of House Bill 2420. I believe that it reinforces a fundamental principle that parents have the primary responsibility and authority over decisions that affect their child's education, health, and well-being. Currently, under Kansas law, if a child needs special education services and testing to obtain those services, we do have to obtain written parent permission. As a school nurse, if I want to give a Tylenol to a child, under law, I have to have written parent permission. I believe that if we have individuals in a school system that are providing mental health services to our children, that we must also have written parent permission. This legislation does not prohibit teachers from asking how a child is doing. It does not prohibit teachers from checking in on a child. How was your weekend? You look like you're not feeling well. I'm concerned about you. Those are all Tier 1 supports that every student gets in our school system, and this bill specifically keeps those things in place. This bill also supports those students that are potentially a risk of self-harm or harm to others. And to the representative that asked a question before, I believe there is a parent notification in the bill with regards to suicide screeners, but that keeps these things in place with this bill. When parents are informed and involved, they are better equipped to support their students at home. Finally, the accountability provisions in this bill are not about punishment. They exist to protect families from being excluded from significant decisions that affect their child's life. Schools that communicate openly and act in good faith have nothing to fear. This legislation supports families supporting their children. It respects the role of educators and recognizes that parents remain the central figures in child's care and development. And so for these reasons, I do urge your support for House Bill 2420. I stand for questions, Madam Chair.
Thank you, and you left time on the clock. Representative Getz.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Representative, for your proponent testimony. I know that you are a school nurse, and you spend a lot of time in these circumstances, more than me. And I just wonder if there's, being a proponent of this, you must see a problem behind this solution. Would you take a little bit of time to just describe what the problem that you see this piece of legislation as a solution for?
Yes, so as a representative in my district, I've had constituents come to me concerned that they have found out that their child is missing academic class time, needing that the counselor is pulling them or the social worker is pulling them out of their academic classes, and they're missing academic work. They're getting behind, their grades are dropping, and the parents didn't know why, and it came to be that they were being pulled out of class to talk about depression, anxiety, gender dysphoria, and they had no idea that that was happening. And so this legislation brings back that important component that parents do have a right to be involved in their child's education.
Representative Stockstill, then Chauncey.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I guess I had a follow-up question from Representative Ruiz on a practical basis, because when I taught elementary, I had a little girl that came into the class, obviously very depressed, very sullen and so on, and I inquired as to what her problem was, and it was very apparent that it was physical and mental abuse at home. It wasn't sexual abuse, but it was definitely physical abuse because there was a handprint across her face. What do we do with the parent of that? Do we report that to a parent that is causing that? How do we handle that?
Representative, I appreciate your question and understand your concern for that. And we already have existing laws that are in place to support those children. As teachers and school staff, we are mandatory reporters, and so we would have to report that to the authorities. whether through DCF or police, kind of depending on where you're at and what agreements you have worked out with people. That emergency service is meeting an emergent need of a student. That's not providing for the continual mental health support. That would be the difference in this bill.
Thank you.
Representative Chauncey?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Representative, just a quick question for clarification. So you say that you have to have permission to give a child an aspirin or a Tylenol, but does the KSDE, do they have any requirements as far as parental consent or parental involvement in this process?
Representative, thank you for your question. I won't speak for KSDE on their specific things, but I would like to note that in order to be a Title I district school, KSDE does have the Every Student Succeed Acts, which does require districts and schools to implement parent and family engagement policies that would involve your parents being actively involved in their students' education. I also would like to note that under TASN, which is dealing with the behavior systems of our school, that they have goals to have family engagement. They believe that it's empowering and it's a partnership. I would also like to point out, Representative, that the National PTA organization has a standard. Their standard number 3 is supporting student success. That families and school staff continuously collaborate to support students' learning and healthy development. I do believe that that would be supporting of this bill.
We'll have Representative Schmoy, Brantley, Boatman, and Getz. Representative Schmoy, you may begin.
Thank you again, Madam Chair. I know that in my local district, from my time in elementary, my local district, we have specials. And so we've got PE, we've got art, we've got computers, we've got music, and we've got counselor. Does this affect the counselor time in the classroom? Do parents need to be notified when that's coming up, or is that something separate?
Thank you for your question. That would fall under the Tier 1, and Tier 1 is excluded from this.
Thank you.
Representative Brantley.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you for your testimony today. I just want to clarify that Tier 1 would be all students in your class, Tier 2 would be some, and Tier 3 would be few, which would be those intensive interventions. Is that where you're talking about a student being pulled out would be a Tier 3 intervention?
Tier 2 and Tier 3. Tier 2 is dealing with the smaller groups where you might be looking at specifically focusing on a mental health issue with a specific group of kids that may be struggling with depression or anxiety or any other potential issue that does need to have parental consent to do so.
Thank you.
Representative Boatman.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Going back to what Representative Stockstill was touching on about mandatory reporting when it comes to abuse in the home. You had also mentioned gender dysphoria among the services, mental health services that would require parental approval. If the parent does not support services for a child experiencing gender dysphoria, is there any recourse? Is that still a mandatory reporting context or not?
Madam Chair, Representative, thank you for your question. I don't believe that reporting gender dysphoria to DCF or the police, that's not my understanding of mandatory reporting.
Thank you, and I don't think that's something.
That's not a mandatory report.
Yeah, thank you. Representative Getz.
Thank you for the second time, Madam Chair. I had a thought and a conversation earlier today about this. The governing body of social workers is not KSDE. There's another governing body. I'm sure there's a good acronym for it. But in their standards is parental consent in their own standards, but yet it's being bypassed once we're in the school setting. And how is that happening if those are all the case?
Madam Chair, Representative, thank you for your question. Social workers are actually, they fall under the Behavioral Sciences Regulatory Board, but we already have a bill on the books. It's KSA 726287 that specifically deals with that social workers are not allowed to conduct ongoing behavioral health treatment. That's not what, it's on the books, but in schools it seems to be that that's being ignored.
Representative Featherston.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Can you talk to me about how this doesn't violate the code, the Nursing Code of Ethics, which requires that care be given while upholding patient dignity, confidentiality, and rights, even in complex situations involving mental capacity, et cetera?
Madam Chair, Representative, the Code of Ethics also requires me to render care to a minor, which I need to have parental consent for if it's not an emergent situation. And so I would still be seeking parental consent for doing so.
All right, I see no more questions. Thank you, Representative. You may retake your seat. Next, we will have Denise Roberts.
Madam Chair, I've got it at about 4.5 minutes. I'm going to do my best. If I pass out,
So everyone has,
somebody else read this.
everyone has a copy of your testimony. Don't feel like you need to read it, but it is a good idea to be succinct and highlight what you think is most important.
I'll do my best. Committee members, thank you for letting me come and support this bill.
Denise, I'm sorry to interrupt. I'm not sure if your light is not on or you're not close to the mic, but we weren't picking you up.
It might be because I'm
That's better. Thank
barely
you.
breathing. Can you, if I get too close, you'll hear my heart beating. This is personal for me. I was not scared to do this the first time, but I think what we've been talking about today is children who come and ask for help. And when we talk about the idea of a parent being a problem, I'm going to need someone to explain to me what that is, unless you're talking about a parent that's dangerous to that child, because if you ask my 13-year-old when she was 13, and she's having a day where maybe I said you don't get to have your phone today, I promise you she would tell you that I am the problem. I want to be very careful here because my children, and all children, deserve boundaries and privacy, and it's up to me to safeguard those for mine. In fact, Kansas statute says that it's my right, and that's why I'm here. In the fall of 2021, our daughter started middle school. Almost immediately, we observed a deterioration in her mental health. This was alarmingly drastic and pronounced. Her grades were still outstanding, but she was really struggling in math. Our joyful artist always in the act of creating in some form with any medium at all times, became a girl who was producing very dark portraits. I reached out to a family member with a background in occupational health and art therapy, and I will never forget what she said to me. Someone is accessing her. There were no sleepovers because of COVID. There was no smartphone to search for clues, no private internet access, no television in her bedroom. There was nowhere for us to look for insight. We were flying blind and we were scared for her. 3 months into this, it's November 2nd, and I'm helping her with her math homework, and she's frustrated and tearful. I asked her if I could see lesson notes from the teacher that day, and she explained that she didn't get the assignment because she wasn't in class. She began to cry and told me that she was missing too much math and that I needed to tell them to stop pulling her out of class. I have a folder of emails with conflicting explanations from the school as to why this was happening and why we weren't notified. I was told that a teacher reported that she seemed off and that a counselor was called. Even though we had always opted out of screeners, I was told that a screener was administered indicating low-end responses in the area of grit and resilience. I was told that I could not view that screener. What my daughter had called not the counselor but a sub turned out to be an unlicensed practicum social work student doing these interventions. Per the Kansas Department of Education's guidelines, interventions are not supposed to proceed without parent notification, but they do. Guidance from TASN claims to adhere to the mindsets of the American School Counselor Association. Those Ask a Mindset state, effective school counseling is a collaborative process involving school counselors, students, families. We immediately pulled our daughter from the school district, and she now attends a private school and is actually thriving. I don't know what the appropriate amount of grittiness is for an 11-year-old girl, but we think she's pretty okay just the way she is, and so does she. After 2 weeks out of that public school, my husband said to me, I feel like we are getting our daughter back. We have never been clearly told what went on in those sessions or how many sessions occurred over those 3 months. One record indicates that the counselor asked to meet with my daughter weekly, and she agreed, because of course she did. You're an adult and you work at the school, and she's going to do what you ask. And there was no parent to ask questions or advocate for her because this parent didn't know. Later, I received another record from the district indicating that the agreement was made to do these weekly meetings, and then no meetings were held. So you agreed to pull my daughter out of class and schedule check-ins with her, and then you never followed up or told me about it. Something seems odd to me. Am I done?
You are, thank you.
Thank you. I'll stand for questions if you have any.
I'm sure that we do. Questions? Representative Ruiz.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you for being here. I can see the emotion. Were any of your daughter's friends experiencing anything similar?
She was actually withdrawing from her friends, and I was noticing that she was spending less time with them. And I have not heard that from her friend group. In fact, I've seen parents from her peer group appeal to the board at our local district to bring in more counselors. I'm not sure that many of them are aware of what happened to us, but I have encountered other parents, as I've talked about this for the last 5 years, who have said, that happened to me.
Representative Getz.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you for your heartfelt testimony today. You mentioned that there was conflicting reports when you started, when you found out this was happening. The information you were receiving from your daughter and receiving from the school were different. Would you be able to explain a little what that looked like, and how long was that process to
What I mean by
investigate that?
conflicting is the reports that were coming from the school contradicted one another. I had to file a CORA request. They claimed that they didn't get it, so I had to send it certified mail. And then they explained that they couldn't give me access to all the student records, and I had to respond with, I actually just want the records for my daughter. I got some records from the very beginning that appear to be backdated because some of the dates don't add up. And then I've got a huge hole, and then I had some delayed records that came from the principal, and they don't agree with the first records that I got. Nothing adds up.
Thank you. Representative Chauncey, and then Brantley.
Just, I guess just a quick question. How long from when this started going on or until she had went and seen the counselors till you had found out as a parent? How long was this going on until then?
The first pullout happened the second week of school. It was determined that she was off. I've looked in the records, and their guidelines say it takes 6 to 8 weeks to get a baseline on a student, so you don't even do screeners in the first 4 to 6 weeks because you can't determine what off is if you don't know that child. This was 2021, so these children were wearing masks on their faces, as was the teacher. At most, she had been in that teacher's room for 5 hours. So I can't figure out how that teacher determined that she was off. I asked her, were you upset about math? Were you crying? And she said, no. The counselor just pulled me out of class and said we should be having weekly check-ins. What was the second half of your question? I'm sorry. I found out about it November 2nd, inadvertently. She thought that we knew about it, and she was becoming angry with us because why would someone be pulling her out of class and meeting with her without us knowing? The backstory to that is I had already, because of COVID and because we had teenage daughters, I had a preteen and a teenager, we have a lot of therapists in our family, and they said, we can't take in any new clients. People are not doing well, and I thought, okay, you're about to shut down my daughter's social lives in a time in their psychosocial development where their peer relationships are going to be vital. And so I want to get on record with a counselor so that in the event that something comes up, I'll have someone. We did a visit with that counselor together, and then she visited with her by herself. They talked about the amygdala and anxiety, how to recognize, breathing. But when she came out, she said, I don't want to do that anymore because I feel really uncomfortable talking about my feelings with someone I don't know very well. So when this started happening at school, she thought that, of course, I would know about that because of what we had done together.
Thank you, Representative Brantley.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you so much for coming today and giving your testimony. I have kind of a twofold question. Was your daughter on an IEP for any type of behaviors, anything at that time? And was the person pulling her out, were they a full-time employee with the district, like a social worker or a counselor?
The social worker was not there the first time. She was out with a sick child, and this was a practicum student being supervised by that counselor.
But they were an employee of the district?
I do not know how the district handles their contracts with, I believe she was coming from Children's Mercy, maybe? I don't remember. I could pull it up in my notes. I do not know if the school contracts directly with them.
Thank you very much.
Representative Getz, and then neighbor.
Thank you for a second time or fourth time. This created a situation in your life where you were trying to then solve this problem. What actions did you then take? You were in investigation and you were taking care of your daughter, but then your rights were violated in a sense. And what recourse were you able to pursue for that happening? And as my final question, how do you feel like this bill helps solve a similar situation for other parents that might go through this in the future?
Well, I've spent 5 years doing research that I didn't ever want to do, and I still don't understand how many of these systems work, but I am more familiar with MTSS and the levels of MTSS. I went to the district when I was getting conflicting results from the district. I was sent to administration. When I went to administration, it felt like I was having to pull teeth just to get the records of what happened with my daughter. We pulled her that day. When my husband found out about it, he said, they're out, we're getting them out. So they were gone by Christmas break, and we found different schools for both of them. I've visited with the Attorney General. I have been in this building testifying to the Ed Budget Committee twice. I've done a panel with the Ed Budget Committee. I'm not sure, one of the things that I've wanted to do over these last 5 years is introduce this conversation. And what I tell to parents over and over is when you see your child going sideways and you don't know what's going on, the first thing you need to do is ask that child, is anyone having meetings with you at school? And I don't think that most parents know that they need to ask that. We have SEL curriculum, that's considered Tier 1, that's universal, that's not something that requires permission. Small group, MTSS works the same way as it would in reading or math. Level 2 is going to be small group interventions, maybe reading outside in the hall, or maybe a group of girlfriends are going to get together with the counselor if we're having problems, outside. But tier 3 is pretty specific. It's supposed to be less than 5% of students. And that is one-on-one interventions. The only thing that I can compare it to is that would be in reading, that would be something like you're seeing a professional for evaluation for dyslexia, and they're going to come up with a plan, and they're going to tell you as the parent, this is what we see as the problem, this is our plan, and these are the professionals that will be meeting with your child. So we got nothing like that, and so I've been knocking on every door that I can at the state level to try to get, it's like there's a hole in the fence that needs to be mended. Something happened probably around between 2012 and 2015 with Kansas Ken, and implementing SEL globally in the school as part of the curriculum in every classroom, that the doors were just thrown open for these mental health interventions. And I see this as putting some guardrails in, because when I visited with the Attorney General, he doesn't represent me, he represents Kansans. And so he said, what I would need is to see a pattern of this happening over and over and over in the state before I could do anything about this.
To me, assessing the fines, number one, says to directors of family and student services, you have guidelines that are your own. Follow them. Like, you've got to stay in line, because I don't know what's going to happen when one of these interventions goes badly. I don't know who's going to be responsible at that point. I don't know what parent will hold that district responsible. But the other thing it does is it keeps a record of how many parents are saying, you've crossed a boundary with my child, and I have an issue with it, and I'd like to see it investigated by the department.
Thank you. We will go to Representative Neighbor, and then we will move to our next conferee, because I have my eye on that clock. Representative Neighbor.
Thank you. I'll make these short. What school district are you with?
They were in Shawnee Mission schools.
Thank you.
And I have one more, just little. Practicum students don't normally meet without a supervisor in the room when they're licensing. So that I would love to check into, but I will tell you the process is when you have a problem, you take that problem first to the teacher. If you do not get a response, and in your note, you say, I need a response in 10 days. If they do not respond, it goes to the next level. In this case, it may be the principal. If they don't respond within your time limit, then you go to the district. And that's how you go through that step. And notate everything you do. Notate the times and the people. I was on the board of Shawnee Mission for 21 years, actually 34. And frankly, that's the process, because then you have the information that you need to substantiate not getting answers and not getting information. And also, that would help you define your timelines.
Do you mean me personally, or do
You personally. Because you are representing your child. So you go through that process, and that's usually the process in all school districts.
Okay, so if you have a child who's in a middle school and they're going to different classes all day.
Yes.
So are you saying that this first step for me would be that specific teacher?
Yes. If that's where they're being taken from and she's having problems in that, you would go to that teacher first and say, because she is being pulled out of class, she is suffering in the math and it's consistent. And that needs, I need a solution to that. Choose a different time of day or a different class for her to meet, whatever it may be. But you are the one that's representing. And you can go to that math teacher and start there.
Okay, I feel like I might have been unclear in my process. I apologize.
No, you're not unclear, but that gives you a follow-up. That gives you a path.
And then what?
Then you go to the principal.
Okay, we're going to stop here, because I think the conferee's testimony is that you did visit with different layers, and there's also, it's interesting, it touches in on the conversation we had during the fetal alcohol syndrome bill, of parents not always feeling like they know these things and feeling they're trying to do best by their child, but there's an institution that wants it done their way. So I think it's a greater conversation. I did hear that you visited with the principal. I don't want us to get into a back and forth. Denise, I really appreciate your time here today. These are very deep and personal things to speak about. And we will move on to the next conferee, Linda Highland.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Chair Estes, Vice Chair McNorton, Ranking Minority Sodstill, and all members. It's really good to be here today. As a parent, I was always busily involved in our children's public schools. My work included being involved with the parents' organizations, helping to establish a support group within the schools for children with special needs, and even volunteering for a principal when asked to help with some of these children. I was known as the picture lady who led classroom discoveries of famous artists' work. It was a lot of fun. Although as time moved on, so did my trust of public schools, sadly, because our children were harmed there and crimes on them happened there, many of which I learned of much later. While I'm not going to go into the details of the atrocities that happened to our children, I can attest here today that all these years later, the hurt is still sharp and very painful. It took some time for me to discover that we as parents had rights. This happened when I began to look at federal and state statutes and U.S. Supreme Court rulings pertaining to parental rights, and there are many. I also looked at who's really driving education today, and I didn't find that it's really the NEA or a lot of teachers. It's people with power and clout and a following, and like the National Governors Association with their executive orders that they bring down through with the governors. So when you look at the history of education and ask questions, how can these things even be happening in America? I looked from our founding until now, and it took a while to sort through all that. I had studied systems in college while getting my master's, and it kind of was useful at that time. Well, you see how all the plans get put into place and how parents sometimes get left out of that system. Well, I'm really advocating today for parents, students, and teachers because I am one. And support for this bill is very strong coming from me because I think it's time that parents certainly are notified. And I really feel that parents don't even really know about the multi-tiered system of supports that are in our schools and how all children fall into one of the three categories. And there's a lot of data collection that goes along with this, and even ks.gov has Panorama and Sabers being used in our schools to investigate our children, my words. And I'm just concerned about that. Some of these systems are even patented, and what are they hiding? So I wanted to answer a question. There's a lot in my testimony, and I go into these accrediting associations of counselors, social workers, and that. And there's a long timeline for MTSS that I would like you to read. And it speaks to what happened also in Eureka schools. I will close with what you heard here yesterday. You heard from a dear student, Scarlett Acosta. And here's her quote, that I experienced severe depression, anxiety, my mental health spiraled down. I went to the restroom with panic attacks, and I went to therapy once a week. Well, I believe parents' rights in this situation is a local control issue. Parents are the first to be in this chain of...
Ms. Highland, thank you very much. Your time has expired.
All right, thank you. I'll stand for questions.
Any questions for Mrs. Highland? Seeing none, we will move to neutral testimony. Kathy Mosher.
Chair Estes and committee, thank you for having me today to testify on House Bill 2420. My name's Kathy Mosher with Astra Mental Health and Recovery, the Topeka Community Mental Health Center, and Certified Community Behavioral Health Center that partners with 5 school districts in Topeka, and I think we're up to 27 schools now providing mental health services in those areas. We are the center that just merged with Vallejo Behavioral Health and Family Service and Guidance to streamline and be more effective and serve our community better. I also serve as president of the Association of Community Mental Health Centers as for the remainder of this year, and then my term is up. So I'm going to focus on just a couple legal areas, and in spirit, CMHCs and CCBHCs, we provide mental health services in schools and everywhere at many locations for children and families in many settings. Parents and families are essential partners in care, and they engaging them is both the norm and the best practice. So inherently, I don't have anything, opposing the spirit of this bill. But Kansas law already clearly defines when parental consent is required and when it's not, and particularly during mental health crises, which expands further than just suicide ideation. It can be danger to others. It can be a lot of different kinds of things. When you see aggressive outbursts in the classroom, those kinds of things. And those involve immediate safety and safety concerns. So with that context, I just want to share a couple concerns with HB 2420 as currently written. First, the bill appears to conflict with existing Kansas minor consent law. Under current statute, minors are 14 and older may consent to outpatient mental health services without parental consent. There's a reason for that. These are thoughtful laws that have been in place for a long time. And this bill does not clearly account for this existing authority, which could create confusion for schools, providers who are already operating under Kansas law in many various settings. Second, the bill does not clearly exempt crisis or emergency mental health services. Kansas law already authorizes immediate intervention when a person appears to be a danger to themselves or others. In school settings, this may include situations such as suicidal ideation or credible threats of harm, bullying, rapidly escalating behavior. In these moments, trained professionals must be able to act immediately and ensure safety with parental notification occurring as soon as feasible. Requiring prior consent in these situations could delay care and increase risk. If that's not happening in a situation that someone encounters, then that could be a personnel issue. That could be something that needs to be brought to attention. Third, the bill's layered consent and the notification requirements are concerning in practice. During a crisis, staff must focus on de-escalation and safety. Parents are often difficult to reach during the school day, and the bill does not address what happens when a child needs immediate support and a parent cannot be contacted right away. Verbal or phone consent is widely accepted in healthcare when time is critical, and written consent, while ideal, is not always immediately possible. I also want to note concerns with language that appears to limit who may conduct suicide risk assessments. Many Kansas school districts rely on contracted mental health professionals from community mental health centers due to the workforce shortages and specialized expertise. These partnerships are essential to ensuring students receive timely, clinically appropriate care and have had excellent outcomes.
Thank you. You are out of time. I wanted to let you get that last sentence finished. Do we have questions for the conferee? Representative Wolf and then Brantley.
Yes, you said 14 and over. I think you meant 14 and under for being a minor. I thought it was under 18. Can you clarify that for me, please?
14 and over do not need parental consent.
Okay, so minors are just 13 and under? Okay, I did not know that. Thank you.
Thank you, Representative Brantley.
It does require attempt to obtain consent, so there's still factors built around that.
Representative Steele, was your input related to that particular question?
I just wanted the clarification on the law is that you have to attempt. You have to do that, and that is for outpatient as well as an emergent need. This bill is addressing the ongoing. There's a difference between what you're quoting and what the bill is talking about with ongoing mental health services. The emergency protections are still there. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Representative Brantley.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm thinking that might have just answered my question, but, so let's say I attempt to call a parent or notify a parent, and I don't get a hold of them. What's the requirement after that fact? If I've met with a student, do I need to still contact them, or do I just let it go?
Yes, engagement with the family is best practice.
Quick follow-up.
Can you define engagement with the family? Is that over a period of days, hours, weeks? So what if it goes a week or two before you finally get a hold of a parent and tell them that you've been meeting with their child?
Well, we'd look at age and the factors going on. There are a lot of assessment factors that go on in terms of that, so that's kind of hard to answer without going back to the law and clarifying what the situation might be.
Very, very fast.
So during that time, you're performing assessments on my child?
Okay, so one of the items in the bill does not refer, it refers to school personnel assessments, so that's one issue in the bill that does not carry over to other mental health professionals that may be in the school. And so that's one part of it. We do, yes, we would, depending on the immediacy of the need, we would let the parent know right away, because the first part is to get, and so if the assessment says that they need further assessment or treatment, then you would need to get consent from the parent to do that ongoing. Sorry, I'm trying to remember all my laws.
Thank you, Representative Chauncey, Hubert, and Wolf.
I guess this might be, excuse me, this might be a question for Jason. Jason, could you clarify how 38-141 would apply here? Or if it is applicable?
He'll have to get back to you, he said. That, he did plan ahead, but that's not the one he planned ahead for. You stumped the lawyer today. Representative Hubert?
And my question might kind of tie in with that, because even as I listened to our revisor's explanation, seemed like there was maybe a little bit of conflict in regards to the testimony that was given. And so maybe even as he's checking on some things, make sure that the testimony is given either conflicts with what was given, or if there's gray areas, or just to do a search there to make sure we're all on the same page.
Okay.
Fact checking's good.
We're happy to do that, and if we work the bill before we work the bill, we'll be happy to hear from Jason on this subject again. Representative Wolf, and then we'll move to the next conferee. Oh, Featherston, and then we'll move to the next conferee.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. So how is it different if they're 13 and under? If you can't get a hold of a parent, how does that look?
That's still in a crisis situation. The laws that govern us govern what happens in a crisis situation, what happens in a duty to protect, duty to safety, immediate need, and then it goes on out into assessment and ongoing. And normally you are supposed to get that consent. So there are different situations and reasons when you would not, when you could go ahead and address the issue and then contact the parent. Yes, they should be contacted.
We don't always want to see children just because it's a crisis. So what if it's not a crisis?
Then you need parents' consent.
Okay, thank you.
Representative Featherston.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Could you tell me, as a mental health provider, how we balance these things? Children who are in some sort of duress versus parents that have been very public in their opposition to things like Project Trevor, any kind of CRT or inclusive teaching, anything that would relate to a child questioning who they are in this world?
I'm not an education specialist, so I'll say that right up front. I'm not a,
I'm thinking as a mental health professional.
as a mental health professional, we partner with the schools and we augment what they offer as needed. And we are there, but we still follow all the rules of getting those consents and treatment, which are very strict.
Thank you. Thank you for being with us today. We will go to our next conferee, and starting at the bottom, we will begin with Mary Sinclair. Because Mary was definitely one of those people that we were rushed with yesterday. Is Mary still
Yes,
there?
Madam
She is.
Chair, appreciate that. Committee members, Madam Chair, Mary Sinclair with the Volunteer Kansas Parent Teacher Association. Thank you for the opportunity to testify. We have two main concerns with this bill. The first is the overly broad definition of mental health services. As written, the language really does not differentiate between the more clinical school-based interventions that parents and building staff may put in place for their children versus the daily kind of developmental whole child supports offered by staff interacting with a crying child or de-escalating a frustrating student to keep those kids safe and supported at school. Second, this bill sets up a punitive confrontational dynamic between educational professionals and parents with the threat of a $5,000 civil financial penalty per student encounter. We are deeply troubled by the chilling effects this punitive bill places on educators every time a child emotes or is distressed. We're concerned about the unintended consequences for our struggling students. It's our understanding that this bill is not necessary and really may be a function of kind of chain of communication, as Representative Neighbor communicated, and our public school educators strive to partner with parents on multiple levels, and you can see it in as a parent all the way from your parent portal all the way through kind of policies that are shared at the beginning of every school year and throughout. Explicit approval from parents to provide the more clinical ongoing behavioral health supports was put into state statute in 2024 and was already in practice in most districts. I believe Representative Steele may have referenced the Kansas PTA legislative platform. I could have misheard, but I would point to legislative priority 1. That defers to local control and the educational professionals to guide that. And I'm really focused on that daily instructional practice to which this high stakes bill is very unclear. And so it's really that level that is really troubling. And I would also raise the question of how this connects with our state statute and state board of education, where the educational goal that speaks to student self-knowledge of his or her mental and physical well-being. That's part of our ROSE capacities. I'm not sure how this bill would even play into that kind of instruction at the level of broadness in which it's defined. So those are our main concerns. Thank you for your consideration. I urge committee members to vote no on this bill. Thank you.
I assume you would like to stand for questions, Mary?
Absolutely.
Representative Getz?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you for your testimony. I guess, I hear some of the duplicative and, I think that there's things that we need to clean up. Definitely willing to hear that. And I hope I hear in some of the other testimony, hey, there has been a problem here, whether it's just from this one parent or 100 parents or 1,000 parents. And what recourse does that parent have when, I know the representative spoke earlier of a time frame of, contact the teacher within 10 days and then the principal within 10 days. Well, this parent didn't know for 3.5 months, at least. So from the PTA's perspective, what recourse would you like to see for the parents that you represent that go through something like this, that could have a law on the books that creates accountability for a situation like this? Because right now, it doesn't seem like there is definitive recourse.
I would gravitate to the part of your question that talks about whether this is one parent or 100 parents or 1,000 parents. And I believe the Attorney General's question about whether this is a pattern. And so to my sense is that if this is a systemic issue that's happening across districts across the state, perhaps that does require some legislative examination or some kind of regulatory suggestions from the Department of Education. So to me, it begins with, it starts there. I get very worried about legislating, this is nothing about the experience of any particular parent and child. I'm not intending to be dismissive. I'm concerned about how this impacts all the other 499,000 children in our schools. The way that this bill is written is high stakes consequences for a very broadly defined set of interactions that most parents and teachers might see happening every day in our schools. So there's a really dangerous mismatch, I think, between components of this bill that we're raising.
And I thank you for your response, and I apologize for any undue passion and that you felt may have been directed towards you. I just a heart for any family that goes through something like that doesn't know what's going on with their child for 3.5 months.
Yeah.
That I'm still trying to wrap my head around that.
Especially during COVID, and if that was, during the COVID years, that was a tough year for everyone to communicate and a lot of things going on. So that was.
Any other questions?
Thank you, Madam Chair.
You're welcome, and we appreciate the policy. I don't think people could see the sign language coming from me over here. Any other questions for the conferee? Seeing none, Mary, thank you for being with us again today, and we will move to Tanya Rickliffs. Thank you.
It's a tricky one. I get that. So. And you all have a copy of my testimony today and some of the duplicate points, so I will make this concise and stand for questions. I am here, Tanya Rickliffs, in the position of the president of the Kansas chapter of the National Association of Social Workers, so that social work organization that was mentioned earlier that manages the Code of Ethics. I am here in opposition to this bill. And that would require parental or guardian consent. I'm not here in opposition in any way to think that the ideal situation, as Kathy even mentioned earlier, is to have the parents, the schools, and everybody working together as a team. That is the best option for us as mental health providers and educators. In the ideal situation, everybody is fully supporting the collaboration. However, you've heard the language of this bill doesn't necessarily adequately account for real-world circumstances. It does have provisions. We've talked a lot about the tiers and the different types, but it does fail to recognize the many urgent mental health situations that fall outside of the narrow definitions. As we've also mentioned before, there are lots of provisions and guidelines and things that are existing out there, not to dismiss any part of a system that doesn't seem to be working adequately. Additionally, not all students have safe or supportive home environments. That was brought up earlier. Besides being a social worker, I am also a domestic mediator and conciliator and have worked with families, and many times in high conflict family dynamics that can actually be a temporary situation. But because of high conflict situations, divorces, etc., we can find ourselves into kind of a temporary situation in the household. Involving a parent immediately at that moment may not be the best, and then eventually everybody coming together as a team. Many times students see the school as they're trusted adults in their life. Kansas schools have long served as a cornerstone of our communities. This bill would create a barrier for some students seeking mental health support and could discourage them from asking for help when they need it most. For these reasons, I urge you to vote no, but also to encourage the interest that we have as an organization to also continue to have conversations about this language to best support our Kansas children. I completely echo the passion to protect and watch for Kansas children, and I will stand for questions.
I'm going to begin with the first question. Could you go back to your testimony?
Yeah.
You said something along the lines of some, and I really don't want to put words in your mouth, so I want to understand if I heard you correctly. Did you say something along the lines of it sometimes it's best
not to immediately call until you assess the situation? And I just think that there could be some clarity in the bill to define, because I understand that suicidal ideations and those parts have been addressed. I think there should be some more further clarity about that. So again, ideally, the perfect moment is to everybody come together as a team and reach out and communicate as a team. So 100%, that is where it is best.
read that line again to me, please?
So sometimes, let me go back to, in situations such as maybe high conflict family dynamics, where involving a parent immediately may not be. And that's why I keyed the word immediately, and to give some time to suss out the situation.
Okay. And I asked on that because as a parent, I think 99% of the time, all of us are trying to work together to do the best for our children. But I did have a personal experience as in my role as a parent, where I called the school, told them something that was going on, and said, please don't talk to my child until I get there. I'm in the car.
Mm-hmm.
And they talked to my child anyway. So that's why that line caught my attention. And I think somewhere in this, there is a feeling of, you know, whose right is it to make that decision? Would you like to respond to my concern?
Yes, yes. I think I would just kind of like to reiterate again, and listening to Kathy's testimony as well, is as mental health providers, you know, I don't want to second guess, and I don't know what the situation is, but I can't imagine how it felt as a parent to then go, well, I'm communicating with you and we're trying to work together here. And so I think it goes back to the conversation about in listening to the supportive testimony today, and listening to the neutral and now the proponents, there's a lot of people in this room that I think could work very well together to improve how communication occurs in the school system and the mental health providers that are within that system. Because social workers are not the only ones. We have psychologists. And so to improve how this language is functioning would be critical to the success of better communication in our systems. Does that help at all for your question?
It does. And we may see some of it a little differently, but I'm pleased that we're both trying to get to the same place. Representative Steele?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you for your testimony. A lot of your testimony centered around emergent situations, which are protected in the bill, and ongoing is what this bill is needing permissions for. And I would like to just, I did mention the bill earlier, 72, 62, 87, conduct that you are not allowed as a social worker per state statute to conduct ongoing behavioral health treatment. You've got to have written parent permission to do so. So I believe a large part of your testimony about for the ongoing, this bill actually helps support that.
Well, and I think that goes back to what I just spoke about a little bit ago, is the concerns are, again, and also from the testimony you heard earlier, there's just some vagueness. And because like I said, you're right, is my testimony was, I noticed that we did talk about emergent situations in the bill. But how we define that, and I know there is some statutes, there is some concern in just kind of talking to some of the constituents and some of the mental health providers is there a way that we can better talk about the language of how it is defined in this bill so it is much more clear and less concerning, where people may be like, well, where does this fall onto the area of emergency mental health care? And it feels a little ambiguous at this point. And again, working together as a team to improve the language would be the ultimate goal.
Thank you. We have Wolf, Featherston, and Hubert. Representative Wolf?
Thank you, Madam Chair. So you've talked about provisions and guidelines, and the one before talked about crisis. Who determines if it's a crisis? Is it one single person? Is it a group that comes in? Is it someone that actually knows the student or knows the child? How is that crisis determined?
Well, and I want to be careful here. Again, I'm not the educational expert. I represent the organization. Ideally, from feedback that I've gotten from other people is we're talking the school setting, you're going to talk to multiple people. And I do know that there's also some educators that are wanting to testify today that can address maybe those particular situations. But ideally, you have a team of people where they're saying, this is what's going on and this is our concern. And that goes back to the team of in the moment, whether it is the mental health professional and the educator together.
Representative Featherston?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm going to try to word my question better this time. As a mental health professional, how do you decide a child's right to services, to talking things out, especially when they might have questions about their sexuality, their gender, their place in this world, when they have a parent who is publicly on the record opposing these things and saying it is not Christ-like to include all?
And I think you referred to quotes about, as for example, the Trevor Project earlier in your question. So as a mental health professional and as a person who, as president of the chapter, our National Association of Social Workers does have stance in this area. And I guess I want to clarify, are you basically asking, and I'm sorry, I'm just trying to make sure I also answer your question pretty specifically. Is there a risk or a concern professionally, as mental health professionals, that we understand there's a risk to life or people's feelings when they're intervening in questions about gender and sexuality?
I think what I'm asking in essence is, does the child have any rights in this?
To speak to someone?
Yes.
So again, you heard earlier that there are opportunities for people to go speak to mental health professionals when they're questioning gender or sexuality. And so from the position of the National Association of Social Workers, you asked about our code of ethics earlier. It is in our code of ethics. There is this balance between self-empowerment in that moment where children are questioning things and where can they go to find those locations. There is concern about negative mental health impacts if they don't feel supported within their community or their home. And it can be community or home. And so there are concerns and widely done research, you mentioned Project Trevor, where there are impacts to people on even whether they feel like they should continue to exist or who they could trust. Does that fully answer your question?
Thank you. We need to, I'm keeping an eye on the clock, and I don't want to shortchange everybody. I'm going to drop testimony down to 3 minutes. I apologize to those who haven't gone yet. I just want to make sure I fit you all in. We asked a lot more questions than I estimated we would, but the questions to me are an important part of committee. Representative Hubert and then Representative Brantley. Tanya, you have.
I heard. It sounded like you were closing up. I apologize.
No, I'm just sorry. Thank you.
When you talk about your code of ethics and in an emergent situation, and even when the chairman spoke about specifically making requests, but somebody decided they could ignore that and proceed, what are the consequences? You have a code of ethics, you have state law and everything else when somebody says, I know best and I'm just going to decide, and then it's determined that they didn't. Is there consequences in that situation? And how is that dealt with in a way that it's more than just a slap on the wrist and saying, well, in the future, don't do that again, but if you do, you'll get away with it because there are no consequences?
I want to clarify, I'll speak very clearly from the social worker profession point, because I think we've also addressed earlier that different schools can have different procedures and processes, and thank you for clarifying some of those earlier. Representative Steele, you mentioned earlier about the Behavioral Sciences Regulatory Board. And there is a regulatory board that does oversee licenses of social work professionals. They oversee licenses of other mental health professionals. And so in cases where people have had concerns about how people are working as a professional, you are able to file a concern, and if you feel like there was a violation, and you can work through the Behavioral Sciences Regulatory Board. That is one option. So again, kind of speaking of, there are some ways. I think it was mentioned earlier that not everybody understands those, right? And that's very clear. Is sometimes it gets confusing. Our systems have procedures and processes that can be very hard for people to understand. But there is a procedure in Kansas that if you had concerns about how social worker, and actually the National Association of Social Workers, you can also reach out to if you have concerns about ethical behavior, and you can file with them.
Tanya, thank you so much. Our next question withdrew in interest of time. Thank you, Representative. We will now hear from Kimberly Martin. Thank you for being with us today.
Thank you.
Hi, I'm Kimberly Martin. I'm the legislative chair of the Kansas School Nurses Organization. And Chairman Estes and members of the committee, I stand in opposition to House Bill 2420. While we firmly believe parents are the primary decision makers for their children, and we always want to work with them in collaboration for the well-being of our students, this bill creates dangerous barriers to care. Our concerns are threefold. First, it's redundant. Current Kansas law, statute KSA 726287, already requires parental consent for ongoing mental health treatment. Second, requiring immediate written consent for even minor check-ins will delay care for students in distress when parents are unreachable. And third, the threat of a $5,000 fine creates an environment in which school staff will prioritize legal compliance over student safety. They'll be afraid to react when a student's in a crisis. Finally, waiting until a student is at credible risk of suicide to intervene without paperwork is reactive, not preventative. We want to catch issues before they become life-threatening. And I want to end my testimony with a personal story that I hope you will all hear and understand why this bill is problematic, because it is overly broad, and there is nothing specific in the bill that I can see that says it's for ongoing mental health treatment. It actually says, let me find the language. It says, any program, intervention, or strategy applied in a school setting that is specifically designed to influence a student's emotional behavior or social functioning. So to me, this scenario hits home with that. I had a student last year who I will always remember as one of the kindest, most helpful students when he was well-regulated. I loved this kid with my whole heart. He's one of my favorite students I've ever had. But he frequently became dysregulated and violent. He would suddenly lash out at and hit, bite, or even stab with pencils or scissors whoever was closest to him, requiring swift action on the part of his teacher, administrators, our social workers, and myself. Often his parent was very difficult to reach, and we often were not able to reach her until hours later. Our administrators, social workers, and myself were able to use calming techniques such as breathing techniques, talking with him, letting him just play with things in the social worker's office until he was calm. And then he would be able to get back to class, or sometimes his mom will have arrived by that time and taken him home. Parents are always contacted in these situations once we've stabilized the student, and usually while we are stabilizing the student, but to have to wait for the parent to arrive and sign a consent would be dangerous for that student, other students, and school staff. This bill would make it very difficult to stabilize a student like this who is having a mental health crisis. We urge you to vote no on HB 2420.
Kimberly, thank you for your testimony, and also thank you for your service as a school nurse. Do we have questions for the conferee? Representative Boatman, thank you. I had a brain fart.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I think my question is more for the reviser. Is there a statutory definition for ongoing?
Madam Chair, members of the committee, there is no general definition of ongoing for the Kansas statutes, nor is there a definition in the bill of ongoing mental health services.
Thank you. Any other questions? Representative McNorton, Vice Chair McNorton.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just a question. I feel for what you were talking about with the example you gave. Would that be considered an emergency level 3 or something? Or help me with that, or where that would come at?
That would be an emergency, but the only thing I see in this bill is in relation to suicidal risk. And this is not a suicidal situation at all.
But it does say the level 1, 2, or 3.
Oh, so level 1 MTSS is what you would teach all students in a class. It's usually something like an SEL program. So this would not cover 2 and 3. We would not be allowed to react as a level 3 without parental consent.
Thank you.
Could that be addressed through a 504 plan?
Some children would have a 504 for that, possibly, yes. Yeah.
Thank you. Seeing no more questions, we will move to Shannon Kimball. And Kimberly, thank you for being with us today.
Chair Estes, members of the committee, thank you very much for the time to talk with you today. Our KASB platform emphasizes that parents are our partners in all things that we do to educate our students. But our members also have expressed strong support for policies that improve student safety, security, health, and well-being, including support for the behavioral and mental health needs of students. Regrettably, we see that the broad language in the definition in this bill undermines the ability of school staff to educate our students because it sweeps in what are commonly used instructional and classroom management strategies into the definition of school mental health services. And that really is a concern. You've heard it from several of the conferees. And it also overrides a robust set of outside requirements on notice and consent that apply to the different professions that would be implicated in this bill. So, we think that there's a distinction maybe intended here between clinical mental health services and all the other things that we do in schools to help students be focused and learn and exist in a school space. So to help you with an example of what the concern is that we see with the language, I'm going to give kind of a little story. So imagine you have a wiggly 5-year-old kindergarten student who really struggles with just generally being in a classroom and behaving. It's time to line up for lunch. She really wants to go to lunch. She's hungry, but she is not able to follow directions and get in line with the rest of the class to leave the classroom. The teacher has a number of strategies, so that's a word that's in the definition, that she uses with the student to influence her behavior, which is needing her to stand in line so that they can all leave the classroom for lunch. Those strategies might include things like a daily behavior report that goes home to her parents, or individually applied redirection interventions when our kinder struggles to line up for the lunch line. What I just described would effectively be subject to this prior notice and written consent procedure that's in the bill. I don't think that that's what is intended, and I certainly appreciate the conversations I've had with committee members about that. Representative Steele gave us some time, and I appreciate that. But it's not what is intended, I think, is not actually what's written in the bill. So there's been a lot of conversation about this doesn't apply in emergency situations. It only applies to ongoing services. It doesn't say that in the definitions in the bill either. Another concern that as I was listening to the testimony, it does have that exception for suicide screeners. It does not mention the fact that we sometimes do school safety screeners. So if you have a student who you think might be at risk for a threat of school violence, like a school shooting, there's not an exception in the bill for that sort of situation either. So, imagine the negative impacts in general on classroom management and instruction from teachers and other educators being afraid of civil penalties every time they engage in one of these things that they routinely do in the classrooms. We respectfully request that you reject the bill in its current form. We'd be happy to discuss how to make it better. Thank you very much.
Thank you. I'm going to ask the first question, and then we have Representatives Chauncey and Brantley. When I was listening to your kindergarten example, I think, wouldn't most of that be normal tier 1 or just normal everyday interaction? I'm not sure that it.
I think the difference is that tier 1 is something that you're doing with every student in the classroom. And if you have a student who has particular behavioral struggles, you may have strategies that you are using just with that student in a moment that that kind of flips it into that tier 2. Some of our students need a little extra help, and it includes a lot of things that are pretty standard classroom supports, positive reinforcement strategies, best bucks or token economies, consequences and restorative discussions, classroom rules and expectations that are explicitly taught and reinforced with an individual student. That's why the concern is about the broad definition.
Okay, thank you very much. Representative Chauncey?
Sorry, Madam Chair. Jason, do we have a definition of partners in the statute? Not in this bill, but in the statute?
Madam Chair, members of the committee, the term partner is used in several different contexts on several different areas of the law. So no, there isn't one definition of partner for all Kansas statutes.
Okay, thank you, Jason. Just real quick, I guess, you mentioned partnership, working with the parents in the schools, having the partnership with the parents. So why would it not be important then to notify the parents if we do have a problem or that we're going to seek mental help for these children if they have an issue and not want to involve the parents?
So I don't believe that my testimony, I said that we don't want to involve the parents or seek their input. What I was describing is a situation where you have, as the definition is written, it says every time you use the strategy or intervention with a student, there is a prior notice and consent process. That's a little bit different. I agree that if you are providing clinical mental health services in schools, notice and consent is absolutely necessary. And I believe that there are a number of places where that already exists, either in statute or regulation. IEP processes are a perfect example of that. Any kind of strategy or intervention that you're using on an individualized basis that might be a mental health service, in that context, you're going to have had that IEP meeting. The parents are going to be involved in those conversations. They will have received notice. They will have given written consent for the services. So that's just one example of where that already happens in our schools.
Thank you. We are so out of time. I'm sorry. Representative Brantley, you're next. Just one.
Thank you, Madam Chair. You mentioned classroom strategies and all the other things we do in schools, and when a child doesn't stay in line, are you saying those are not tier 1 classroom things that you would take care of on a daily basis?
My understanding, if you have a particular set of strategies or things that you're using with one student in your classroom, as opposed to all students, then it's not necessarily a tier 1. I think the other thing to know is that while MTSS is very common, it is not necessarily the language that is spoken in every school around this. And so I'm a little, I wasn't going to raise that as an issue in testimony, but I am a little concerned that we're applying a structure in statute that is not necessarily universal.
I said one, and I held the other representative to that. I encourage you guys to have additional conversations. Shannon, thank you for being with us today.
Thank you very
much. Jim Carlskent. There's Jim in the back. Jim, thank you. Welcome back to committee.
Thank you, Madam Chair and committee, and it's great to come in front of you as the clock strikes 3 o'clock. But I don't want to take a great deal of your time. As I shared with you yesterday, I represent the United School Administrators of Kansas. We are opposed to the bill. We're not opposed to the fact of having parent involvement, because that's a key to success for kids, success for schools. The testimony that was shared by the proponent was tragic. That's terrible. I think Representative Neighbor brought up some good points about what needs to be done. This bill, as it's written, is too broad. In all due respect to whoever wrote it, but it needs to be narrowed. You know, I could give you horror stories of what it was like being, you know, when I was a middle school principal, but I'm afraid of what, if this bill would be passed, what it would do to our teachers. I mean, you've got a teacher that's coming right out of school, they would look at this and say, hey, I'm gonna go, you know, deliver for Amazon or something like that. We need teachers, we need good teachers, but let's not chase people off, you know, but let's work together. When I say we support, you know, the United School Administrators of Kansas wants to support what's best for kids. There's many, many proponents in this bill that's good for kids. There's some that could hurt them and could hurt what we're trying to do. You know, in the means of time, I won't stay up here any longer, but we are willing to work with you. If you have any questions, I'll be happy to stand for them.
I think Representative Steele looks forward to hearing for you. Any questions for our conferee? Seeing none, Jim, thank you for being with us again. Tim, you get the least amount of time today. Or take it as a compliment.
All righty. Well, hey, I will cut my comments pretty short here because I know it's late. Everybody knows my name. I do work for KNEA. For those that are watching at home, KNEA is Kansas National Education Association. We're the teachers union. Look, I want to make it very, very clear that we don't just support parental involvement. Our members actively and intentionally encourage it. We need it. Teachers do not just give lip service to the idea of a parental involvement or control. They practice it every day, every single day. Most of them are parents as well. So our testimony should not be considered to be dismissive of the story we heard earlier. And to Representative Getz's point, I acknowledge her story. I don't know the details, but I believe what she's saying. Are there interventions that may need to be reassessed? Probably, absolutely. Are there situations that warrant a closer look and that raise real concerns? Of course. There's always room for improvement. We feel this bill goes too far. Now, I'm not going to get into the fine. You can read what I talk about in the fine. But I do want to talk about the Tier 2 and Tier 3 interventions and what this could do to the classrooms. The bill is written too broad. Educators across Kansas are deeply concerned that the definition of school-based mental health services would capture routine classroom practices that happen every day. Tier 2 and Tier 3 strategies often include simple, short interventions, pulling a student aside to de-escalate, offering a brief reset, or using a focused one-on-one activity to help the student regain control. This is vitally important to the classroom management and the safety of students and the safety of the teachers. These things have to take place. These teachers need to have these tools in place. We've talked about it. We've had a roundtable discussion in this room about the situation in classrooms where teachers are being assaulted on a daily basis, and not just by older students. We're seeing it at the pre-K levels. So this is something that they take very seriously. My example or my statement about Tier 2 and Tier 3, and let me restate that. I'm trying to be good. The example that we give about taking away the Tier 2 and Tier 3 strategies is one that is very concerning because of the fact that it is going to cause these classroom challenges for the teachers. We're not looking for reasons just to pick apart the bill. We really aren't. We would have liked to have heard up front about this. We could have calmed down a lot of our members in doing so if we could have just had some conversations. We're begging you guys to invite us to the table. All of the confusion over this bill and what a Tier 2 strategy may be, what a Tier 3 strategy may be, we could have probably put a lot of that to rest before this hearing was ever took place. And when our members hear about this stuff, when a bill is introduced on a Thursday and the hearing is on a Friday, and then I'm working on 2 or 3 testimonies over the weekend to respond, that's when the unintended consequences and the misinformation soars, and that's when we start fighting. And so, please, we'll be a resource.
Tim, thank you, more sign language. Thank you very much. Do we have questions for the conferee? Representative Featherston?
Could you give me some specific Tier 2 interventions that teachers use?
So in saying this, I'm not an expert, okay? I'm getting my information from the people that I believe to be the experts, and those are our teachers, those are our members, the people that are in the classroom. I hope I'm dead wrong on my interpretation here. But a Tier 1 intervention would be much like what you've heard before. Let's say you have a classroom of kids that are getting unruly. The teacher decides, okay, what we're going to do is we're going to allow you to have reading for 10 minutes on your own time as a class. And that's a strategy or behavioral tactic or tool used to calm the students down. But say there's a Tim Graham in that classroom and he doesn't calm down. And Tim Graham gets pulled aside, as Tim Graham did many times, and they are telling you and giving you tactics or giving you some sort of intervention one-on-one to calm you down, to keep you out of trouble, then many of our members believe that's a Tier 2 strategy. If that's not the case, then we would love to be able to communicate that to our members. Does that make sense? I forgot who even asked the question. I was so into it.
That was Representative Featherston. We need to call you parents and get these stories. Any other questions for our conferee? Tim, thank you for being with us. We appreciate your time. We had an item on our agenda, which was to hear from the Department of Education on some questions that arose from 2203, which was the fetal alcohol syndrome bill. We are obviously out of time, and Dr. Harwood, would Tuesday of next week be a good day to hit on that? I need to kind of go look at the other agenda, but in my mind, we want to give a chance for the department to answer some of the questions, especially about parents' rights that came up the other day. So Gabby wrote them in her book. So God bless Gabby. Hearing nothing else, we are going to adjourn. Thank you all for a very interesting and great conversation.